Well, across the country, workplaces have recently terminated employees over their vaccination status. Many employers have imposed vaccine mandates, meaning their employees must be vaccinated or risk being terminated. And that is leading to a surge in calls to employment lawyers. To talk about this, let's bring into the program right now Muneeza Sheikh. She is an employment lawyer, also senior partner at Levitt Sheikh. She joins us right now in Richmond Hill, Ontario. Muneeza, good to see you again. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Michael.
Now, for individuals fired for failing to meet a workplace vaccine mandate, do they actually have a strong legal case against their former employer?
It really depends, Michael, on whether or not there's a viable reason for as to why they can't comply with what is now known and understood to be a reasonable policy. So if your employer has implemented mandatory vaccinations in the workplace, you have a legal obligation to comply with that policy, unless there's some protected ground, unless there's some medical reason that would prevent you from being vaccinated. But under the circumstances, if you don't comply, then it's considered to be a violation, like violating any other workplace policy. And of course, there's termination on the table.
Does it matter where one works? I'm thinking an accountant versus, say, a healthcare worker. Does a case actually depend on the type of employment they're involved in?
I think, from a pragmatic standpoint, that if you're working at a workplace where there's an opportunity to perhaps work remote, what we've advised some of our employee clients is that if ultimately you've worked the bulk of the pandemic in a remote capacity with limited interaction, obviously difficult for a healthcare worker with other individuals, you might be able to make a case for saying, look, I'm not going to comply with the policy, and here's why, because I can effectively work remotely from home. Where you are, however, working with other individuals, it becomes very difficult and much more difficult to make the argument that you can't comply with the policy for whatever the reason might be.
What about the differences between a unionized workplace versus a non-union workplace? Because it seems that many of the complaints are coming from people who actually work in a non-union environment.
In a unionized workplace, we often tell our unionized clients that, they are bound by the terms of the collective agreement. So it's whatever their union has negotiated with their specific employer. And so you don't really have the flexibility or the freedom to negotiate on your own with your employer, even if those negotiations, might entail discussions around whether you can or cannot be vaccinated or what the medical reason might be. In a non-union context, however, that's where we see the bulk of the wrongful termination cases coming to light around this whole vaccination issue, because it's the lawyers that are handling it as opposed to the unions.
Now, we're not even at the 2-year mark of this pandemic, so I'm wondering, is there any precedent that's been set in terms of these vaccine mandates and the employer's ability to terminate someone from their position?
Not yet, Michael. And so what we're saying to our clients is this is a landscape that's changing very rapidly. So even those employees that have filed wrongful termination cases because they've been walked to the door for their failure to be vaccinated, it would be surprising to me if their cases are heard before the summer of 2022. And that is even quite aggressive. I think the big question for any employee that is considering launching a wrongful termination suit is, what is the reason they are choosing not to be vaccinated? We have seen some soft encouragement from the government where if you are going to terminate somebody for their failure to be vaccinated, at least give them a package or, give them some sort of severance before you walk them to the door, and don't terminate them for cause. I think where we're going to see the bulk of the wrongful termination cases, whenever they might be heard, and my prediction is it's going to be closer to the end of 2022, it's whether the employer had the right to terminate the employees with no money and for cause.
Well, that's interesting, and I have less than a minute, but I do want to ask you, so what's the most that a person can hope for here? To be reinstated, or is this really just about financial compensation?
If you are speaking in a non-unionized context, then it would be about financial compensation and looking at whether or not you should have received a severance for your failure to comply with an otherwise reasonable workplace policy. In a unionized context, Michael, it's always different, and reinstatement is always on the table. Our judges do not have the power to reinstate, however.
Always interesting to speak with you, Muneeza. Thank you for this. So appreciate the time.
Thanks, Michael.
And that's employment lawyer Muneeza Sheikh, a senior partner at Levitt Sheikh, and she joins us in Richmond Hill, Ontario.